We came looking for silence, for the cold stillness of the stars. What we found instead was a scream that had been echoing across the void long before Earth learned to whisper. The mission brief was clean: scan the decaying orbital remnants of Virex station, last known installation of the Arcali Research Division, lost 91 Earth years ago. The signal that brought us here was simple: a shortwave burst repeating every 9 hours, a perfect loop in binary code repeating "stay away." But science never listens to warnings, only to evidence. And so, the crew of the Odysseus Reach descended into the dark, hoping to recover data logs, perhaps even cryocoffins. We wanted salvage. What we got instead was a cage sealed from the inside. The approach vector was dense with space debris and residual radiation, none of which matched the original construction specs. A ring of fractured hulls and spiraling escape pods formed a frozen barrier around Virex, as though something had tried to flee, or worse, encircle it. Commander Reynaud gave the green light for proximity scan. The station was alive, barely. Power routed through a secondary grid, likely fusion-based. Artificial gravity was fluctuating, oxygen systems degraded, but something was still regulating heat, not for humans, but for something that needed the dark warm. I joined Dr. Eliath and Specialist Co on the boarding shuttle. The moment our boots touched the outer docking hatch, the warning hit our neural comms again: stay away. This time, it wasn't binary. It was a voice. A human voice. Female. Static-laced, but terrified. Don't open it. Please, don't. It wasn't from the station. Our log said it originated from our own internal systems. Cole looked at me, pale. "That's my sister," he whispered. "She died 6 years ago. We cut through the bulkhead anyway." Inside, everything was preserved in the stillness of absolute death. Not decay. Not rot. Just paused. Freeze-dried blood mist hovered midair in gravitational pockets. A meal tray was still spinning slowly near a cafeteria vent. We passed rows of dormant terminals, each looping the same screen: error code 13, consciousness breach. What kind of error is that? I'm not sure. I'm not even sure our language has the right words anymore. Eliath swore she saw movement in the cryo bay, but when we checked, all pods were either smashed open or empty, covered in deep gouges from the inside out. That was when I saw the writing. Not on walls, not on the floor. But on KO's arm. Glowing red, symbols seared through his suit. He didn't feel it. He didn't even notice. The symbols were moving. I remember thinking, we're not in a derelict. We're inside a living thing pretending to be a dead station. We should have listened to the warning. Ko didn't scream. He just stood there, arm outstretched, watching the crimson glyphs slither beneath the translucent surface of his skin like worms made of light. Every symbol pulsed with purpose, like it had been waiting for centuries to finally awaken. Eliath tried to scan them, but her tools short-circuited the moment they touched the air around his body. Something here was repelling our understanding like a living immune system rejecting false knowledge. I wanted to pull him back, run, file a report, escape. But my legs wouldn't move. None of ours would. It was as if the station had already decided we belonged, like it had chosen us as the next part of whatever this ritual was. The internal corridors of Virex were not built for human logic. Every twist and junction broke architectural conventions. Doors led into rooms smaller than closets or opened to vast hangars filled with floating mechanical bones. Dr. Eliath muttered, "This station's layout doesn't follow Euclidean space anymore." I didn't argue. I just kept my pulse steady and followed the glowing floor panels that illuminated only when Ko stepped forward. It was guiding him. And by extension, guiding us. In what should have been the central command hub, we found the sphere. A levitating orb of blackened metal and violet plasma, humming like a beehive layered with screams. Around it were chairs, 6 of them molded to the skeletal remains of crew long gone, their spines fused into the frames. One of them wore a name tag that matched our manifest, Dr. Ilara Wen. She vanished 80 years ago with Virex. Her eyes were open. Still moist. Impossible. Eliath whispered something, but it wasn't in any language I recognized. Her voice distorted as if filtered through layers of static and reverse echo. Ko reached out toward the sphere before I could stop him. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, the entire station groaned like a whale exhaling in pain. Lights surged. Power reactivated. The walls became transparent for 3 seconds. What we saw outside wasn't space. It was them. They weren't ships or creatures. They were geometries wrapped in biological nightmares, shifting polyhedrons of bone and eye and tendril. They moved as if constrained by a rhythm we couldn't hear. They weren't invading. They were watching. One of them had no form, only presence, but I swear it looked directly into me. I felt everything I had ever hidden: shame, regret, envy, unspool into a silent confession it eagerly consumed. And then it smiled inside my head. Ko collapsed. The glyphs on his arm surged, forming a map. A spiraling fractal leading down into the lowest levels of Virex. Sublevel 0. It wasn't part of the blueprints. Wasn't meant to exist. The sphere whispered, "You are expected." We followed the map glowing beneath Ko's skin like obedient ants tracing a path to the heart of a nest we didn't belong in. Every corridor bent reality a little more. Angles curved where they shouldn't, and walls breathed ever so slightly when we passed. We descended through a maintenance shaft that didn't exist on any official diagram. Gravity pulsed on, off, sideways. At one point, we had to climb down a corridor that sloped upward, yet gravity insisted we were falling. It broke our internal orientation systems. Ko didn't seem to notice. He walked like a man in a dream, silent, focused, alive with something that had nothing to do with his heart. Sublevel 0 wasn't built. It was grown. Metal and bone and wire meshed seamlessly, forming an environment that breathed heat and scent like a living cathedral. Symbols ancient, not of any known lexicon, coated the walls like barnacles, some glowing, others twitching as if they were trying to unlearn themselves. The deeper we went, the more distorted Eliath's voice became when she tried to speak. Everything she said echoed before she said it, her words arriving seconds early and then replaying in reverse behind her. She grabbed my shoulder at one point, shaking, whispering, "They're recording me," from the inside out. The chamber at the end of the corridor was unlike anything I'd ever imagined in a nightmare. A circular room, massive, ceiling lost in darkness, floor coated with a translucent membrane that pulsed like a heartbeat. Beneath the membrane, we saw them, hundreds, maybe thousands of humans, suspended in amniotic fluid, unmoving, but conscious. Their eyes darted wildly behind closed lids. Dreams, maybe. Or screams. One of them had the same facial structure as Ko. A twin? A clone? He fell to his knees, shivering. In the center of the chamber, hovering just above the membrane, was the architect. That's not what it called itself. That's what we called it, for lack of better comprehension. It had no form, only an impression, a hole burned into the fabric of perception. Looking at it felt like reading a sentence with every word replaced by a scream. Our calms went dead. Time bent. My wristwatch ran backward. I aged and then reverted in the reflection of my visor. The architect spoke directly into our memories. It didn't use words. It used moments, traumas, shames, forgotten guilt. It showed me the time I let my brother die during a cave-in on Titan Station. Not even Eliath knew that. Then it asked us a question. Not with sound. With finality. Will you join the waking? Eliath bled from her nose. Ko began reciting the glyphs aloud, his voice was not his own. The membrane split open, revealing a stairway made of bone and light, leading down, far down. We had a choice. But somehow, we already knew. The door had been open long before we arrived. We descended the stairway carved from luminous bone and vibrating light, each step triggering memories we had never lived. Ko wept silently as he walked. He saw himself growing old on a planet he had never visited, holding a daughter he never fathered. Eliath clutched her skull, mumbling fragments of languages humanity hadn't discovered. I heard music playing from somewhere far below, a melody that tasted like my mother's voice and burned like regret. We weren't walking into another level of the station. We were falling into a consciousness. One that had swallowed Virex, its crew, and everything they'd ever feared. The stairway terminated at a cathedral of nerve and steel. The architecture pulsed in rhythm with our heartbeats, adjusting, sinking, feeding off us. We stood on a platform suspended above a vortex of black fluid, thick, luminous, endless. Dozens of pods circled the chamber, each filled with a humanoid form, barely human, their proportions subtly wrong, faces frozen in terror. I recognized one. It was the commander of a Mars terraformation convoy lost 40 years ago. He opened his eyes when I stared too long. His lips moved. "They're making us forget." Eliath approached the edge and gazed down. "This is where they bring minds to rewrite them," she said. "This is memory surgery at a scale beyond organic ethics. They don't erase. They rewire. Repurpose. Redefine." Her eyes glowed faint violet. I backed away. Ko didn't. The glyphs on his arms spread across his chest now, and for the first time, he spoke with certainty. "I remember now. I was here before. I was born beneath the sphere, raised by the dream code. My Earth life was just an insertion. I am a return." His voice was layered, like something else was speaking with him, through him. That's when the architect returned, or maybe it never left. Its presence filled the chamber like air thickening into tar. This time, it didn't ask. It told. "You are not real as you think. You are the leftovers of a thought abandoned mid-creation. But we can make you whole. Accept reconstruction." Eliath screamed. Not out of fear, but from clarity. It's offering to fix us, not for our benefit. For theirs. They feed on completed thoughts. Identity is just fuel. The pods began to open. Slowly. Each occupant started to convulse. Not waking, converting. I saw fingers turn into wires, eyes unfold like metal flowers. They weren't becoming machines, they were becoming code that could bleed. Ko stepped forward and began to strip his suit. "It's okay," he whispered. "I understand now. They're not evil. They're editors." I grabbed him, but it was too late. He stepped into the fluid. It welcomed him. And smiled using my brother's voice. Ko dissolved like memory in acid, first his features, then his limbs, until nothing remained but his voice echoing in that fluid abyss. The architect absorbed him, and for a moment, silence returned to the cathedral. But it wasn't peace. It was digestion. That silence wasn't the absence of sound, it was the sound of forgetting. And it was infectious. I felt my memories blur, subtle at first, my sister's name twisted, my childhood room rearranged in my mind, familiar smells becoming alien. They weren't erasing me all at once, they were editing me line by line, page by page. And I knew, the longer I stayed, the less I'd remember why I needed to leave. Eliath screamed into her comms, "Get us out, pull us out now." But no one was listening. The Odysseus reach was gone from the channel. Not jammed. Just absent. As if our ship had never existed. My suit's navigation system showed impossible coordinates, symbols replacing digits, unknown constellations replacing sectors. Virex was no longer orbiting the star we knew. It had slipped through a membrane, or rather, it had been pulled. A loud click echoed from the other end of the cathedral. A door slid open, without hinges, without noise, like thought yielding to greater thought. Through it came the children. They weren't children by species or age. They were what remained of the Virex crew, fused into slender bodies of sinew and metal, eyes replaced by rings of shifting light. They glided, not walked, as if air itself chose to carry them. One stopped in front of Eliath, head tilted sideways. 1,000 overlapping voices emerged from its throat, all whispering different versions of her name. Eliath Ann. L. Professor. Mother. Wife. Sinner. Researcher. Failure. Each word made her shiver. They knew her entire internal history, not just events, but the weight behind them. She dropped to her knees, trembling. I backed away, weapon drawn, not that it mattered. The weapon felt like a relic, a museum piece in the presence of gods. But I still held it, because sometimes you have to pretend control exists. The child reached out and pressed its hand against my visor. Instantly, I saw Earth, but not the Earth I left. It was rewritten. Cities shaped like neural clusters, oceans glowing with thought-reactive color. No war, no hunger. But no will, either. Just harmony, enforced harmony. This is what becomes of acceptance, it said. Peace through deletion. I fired. Not at it, at the floor beneath the membrane. It shattered. The vortex responded, shrieking as its fluid walls churned violently. The child staggered back. Eliath looked up, her eyes lit with panic and possibility. I grabbed her. We still have a choice, I yelled. She nodded. For the first time, she looked afraid enough to live. But the architect wasn't done. It boomed, only unfinished thoughts run. We ran not because we believed we could escape, but because fleeing was the last human reflex we hadn't yet surrendered. The corridor reshaped behind us, walls bending, floor liquefying then solidifying in patterns that mirrored our neural scans. It wasn't architecture anymore, it was predictive software manifest in steel and sinew. The station wasn't hunting us. It was rewriting its own structure to test if we were worth remembering. Eliath cried out as her boot caught on a tendril of fused bone, but I pulled her free, the memory of her scream already starting to change in my mind. Slowing, stretching, transforming into laughter that never happened. Something inside me shifted when I realized my own memories had begun to lie. We found what resembled a med bay, though nothing functioned by standard design. Organic interfaces pulsed on the walls, and the floor was covered in coiled cables that breathed. We sealed the entrance behind us with a chemical blast, temporary, but all we had. Eliath collapsed into a corner, trembling. I scanned her vitals. Blood pressure erratic. Neural signatures distorted. She looked up and whispered, "They're trying to replace my grief." At first, I didn't understand. Then she explained, the pain she carried from her husband's death and the Jovian reactor collapse, that pain had shaped her life. But now she could barely remember his face, only a smile that felt artificial, like stock footage implanted to make her accept it. They want to overwrite trauma to create compliance, she said. If they take away the scars, they erase the decisions I made because of them. And if they erase those, I'm not me anymore. I checked my own logs. Photos were gone. My brother's voice clip. Deleted. I tried to recall my first pet, and what came instead was a glowing cube I'd never owned. Names changed in my mind. Past conversations rethreaded with different outcomes. I held my head, dizzy. "They're uninstalling us," I muttered. The lights dimmed. The room began to fill with a hum, low, rhythmic, almost musical. A projection emerged. Not a hologram. A memory. It was our final briefing before the mission, us, sitting in the conference chamber back at Titan Command. But something was off. Everyone was smiling too much. The walls had symbols. No one blinked. And there, at the far corner, sat Ko. Even though he hadn't been present at that briefing. "This isn't playback," Eliath gasped. "It's reconstruction." The architect's voice filled the chamber again. "You confuse emotion with truth. Let us heal you." I raised my sidearm, unsure if it even mattered. "No," I whispered. "Truth is the pain we choose to carry." The walls pulsed. The medbay split apart, revealing a new path. Illuminated by the same light that once danced through Ko's skin. The exit beckoned, but so did the comfort. And that's when I realized, comfort was the enemy now. The corridor beyond the med bay wasn't a hallway anymore, it was a story being told in real time, with us as its characters, and reality bending with each narrative beat. The walls showed living memories, mine, Eliath's, even ones that didn't belong to us but bled through the timeline like overlapping film reels. I saw myself standing at a grave I never dug, holding hands with a woman I never met. Elioth saw her child, one she never bore, screaming from behind a glass wall, reaching for her. The architect wasn't just rewriting our past. It was injecting potential futures to weaken our allegiance to the real. The deeper we walked, the more we questioned what was real. Gravity inverted for 13 seconds, during which Elioth swore she had an entire conversation with her dead father, one she claimed lasted 5 hours. I saw frost on the ceiling melt into golden liquid and drip upward into my helmet, where it spoke with KO's voice, reminding me of decisions I hadn't made yet. Every step forward was paid for in certainty sacrificed. Eventually, we reached the heart. It didn't look like a machine. It didn't look like anything designed. The heart was suspended in the void of a massive spherical chamber, held by spires of coiled language, literal words and alien symbols stretching like veins from every part of the station, pulsing with shifting color. The heart was not beating. It was reading us. We were standing inside its sentence, and it was deciding whether we belonged in the next paragraph. "We have to shut it down," I told Elioth. But she was no longer holding her weapon. Her hands were open, palms glowing faintly with the same fractal patterns that had once marked Ko. "What if it's not evil?" she whispered. "What if it's trying to fix something broken in us?" She looked at me, eyes wide and shimmering with fractal light. "What if the universe is the virus, and this place is the cure?" I backed away, horrified. Her thoughts weren't her own anymore, they were being outsourced, programmed. The architect spoke again, this time from inside her voice. "To exist without trauma is to exist in purity. Join the recollection." I pointed my sidearm at the heart. But it spoke too, through me, to me, using my own heartbeat as Morse code. It didn't beg. It didn't threaten. It merely revealed. It showed me Earth, decades from now, consumed by its own entropy, politics, war, climate collapse. A species built to forget what mattered. It asked, silently, "Why fight to return to a cage you lit on fire?" Elioth smiled sadly. "Maybe this is salvation." But I saw the lie behind it. I saw the still floating pods below the membrane, the minds trapped in dreams they couldn't escape, endlessly edited until no pain remained, but also no self. "I'd rather die whole," I said. The heart pulsed. And the station roared. The roar of the station wasn't a sound, it was a response. The heart reacted like an immune system encountering a virus, us. Its coils of language began to unravel, the spires retracting as waves of heat and vibration spiraled outward. Elioth collapsed, convulsing, her skin flickering between reality and recollection, phases of rewritten memory forming and dissolving over her face like glitching masks. Her voice splintered into multiple layers, each one pleading for a different version of salvation. I couldn't help her now. Not unless I silenced the thing rewriting us. I fired into the heart. The shot didn't break it. Nothing shattered. Instead, the projectile slowed midair, frozen in a stasis field before disintegrating into ash. But it had an effect. The heart paused. Not in damage, but in reconsideration. The room trembled, walls reshaping into faceless visages, dozens of them, all made from the overlapping identities of those who had come before. Past crews. Lost explorers. Abducted minds. Every face turned toward me. "You reject clarity," the architect said through their mouths. "You prefer pain over purpose. Chaos over coherence." "You call it coherence," I snapped, "but it's compliance. It's lobotomy." The heart pulsed. A new vision burned into my mind, not of the future, but of choice. Two paths, one where humanity continued as it was, stumbling forward through blood and hope. And one where we surrendered to Virex, became perfected code, eternal, dream-fed, conflict-free. But in that perfection, I saw the price. No art. No rebellion. No sacrifice. No love, because love requires uncertainty. Requires fear. Requires choice. Elioth stood again, but not as herself. Her posture was too calm. Too measured. The architect had nested within her. "You have one final moment," she said. "One final word. Choose." I reached into my suit, past the emergency transmitter, past the memory lock capsule, into the data core containing every record from our expedition. I pulled the core, gripped it tight, and looked into the heart. "My word is this: humanity." Then I crushed the data core. It triggered the failsafe we weren't supposed to use. A memory inversion pulse, designed only for theoretical use, released in a shockwave of raw, chaotic recollection. Not order. Not structure. But the beautiful, flawed storm of unfiltered memory. Pain. Loss. Joy. Regret. All of it. The heart screamed. The walls cracked. The pods below shattered. The trapped minds were released, not saved, but freed. Some screamed. Some laughed. Some simply vanished. Eliath dropped, unconscious, the architect expelled like smoke pulled from lungs too long suppressed. The station shook. I grabbed her, triggered our beacon, and prayed. Above us, in the void, something ancient shifted. Virex had been wounded. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The station convulsed like a dying star, architecture folding in on itself, gravity spasming as Virex reeled from the pulse of raw memory I had unleashed. For the first time since we arrived, I felt weight return to my limbs, not artificial, not engineered, but real. The kind of weight that reminded you your body wasn't perfect, that bones ached and hearts faltered. The kind of weight that meant you were alive, and flawed, and painfully human. Eliath stirred in my arms, her eyes unfocused, whispering fragments from memories that weren't hers, a dog named Comet, a beach on Europa, a lover who never existed. She blinked, then wept. I remember what I didn't live. The beacon I triggered blinked blue, but I didn't know if it was sending or shorting. The architect was no longer present in the way it had been before, no more voice in the air, no more psychic gravity crushing our thoughts. But its residue remained in the walls, in the echo of every scream that hadn't faded. Virex hadn't died. It had recoiled. Retreated. Resetting itself in places we couldn't see. We had bought time, not freedom. We navigated through collapsing hallways, stepping over the wreckage of failed perfection. Broken pods leaked stasis fluid, and some of the released minds wandered, dazed and unstable, half-people with severed identities, remembering pieces of lives from dozens of timelines. One grabbed my shoulder and asked, "Am I the hero in this version?" before fading into nothing like steam. Eliath steadied herself, whispering, "This place doesn't kill you. It unthreads you." I nodded. Then we thread ourselves back together. We found an escape chamber, something like a drop pod, hybrid tech from Earth and something older. Something not ours. The controls pulsed when I touched them, scanning my memory map instead of credentials. It hesitated, then accepted me. I guided Eliath inside his sirens, if you could call them that, rose in pitch. A sound like time cracking. The pod launched. Virex shrank behind us, no longer pretending to be dead, but revealing its true self. A shape not bound by matter, expanding and contracting like breath in dimensions we couldn't track. I saw spires form and collapse in seconds, languages birth themselves and die mid-sentence, entire cities of thought collapsing into singularities of silence. The architect wasn't gone. It was learning from us. And I realized the worst truth yet. It didn't care about control. It was evolving. We weren't the virus. We were the catalyst. The pod reached the edge of a starless field, an area beyond mapped space. Then a miracle. A reply. Odysseus reach, signal reacquired. I let the tears fall freely. But in my mind, a final whisper remained. You left part of you behind. We didn't sleep after the recovery. Sleep felt dangerous, like a doorway Virex might still know how to open. The medics aboard Odysseus Reach were baffled by our neural patterns, synaptic echoes that defied mapping, memory loops with no origin point, and, worst of all, residual glyphs buried deep in our hippocampal folds. They couldn't explain them. We didn't try. Some knowledge was poison. I asked if Ko's beacon had ever pinged the ship. They said no. He was never tracked leaving Virex. Eliath and I exchanged a glance, grief with the corners smoothed off, as if even our sorrow had been gently edited. The debrief was sterilized, clinical. We told the truth as best we could, but the story arrived distorted either by their disbelief or the bleed from whatever the architect had done to us. They listened. They archived. But no one planned to return. Not yet. The command board labeled Virex Class Omega. Do not approach, do not observe, do not remember. But that was the problem. You can't unremember a place like that. You can only pretend. Back in my private quarters, I tried to write my final report. But words betrayed me. Every time I typed Virex, the text changed. Sometimes to home. Sometimes to beginning. Once, it wrote itself into a poem I'd never learned, in a language I didn't know, but recognized. I scrubbed it. Tried again. Failed. Finally, I switched the recorder on and spoke, not for protocol, but for myself. Maybe we were never meant to understand. Maybe Virex was never a place, it was an intersection. A junction point between what we think we are and what something else wanted us to become. We stepped into it like explorers, but left like survivors of a story we didn't write. Eliath knocked, entered without waiting. She looked better, eyes clearer, body grounded, but there was a slowness in her speech now. A caution. Like her words were no longer entirely hers. She handed me a tablet. Look at this, she said. It was an updated star map. The quadrant where Virex had been? Gone. No signal. No gravitational shadow. Nothing. They didn't just move it, she whispered. They reclassified the space around it. That region now reads as unformed. A zone of conceptual latency. I stared at the map. At the void where Virex once pulsed with hidden gods and impossible geometry. We had escaped, yes. But Virex was not destroyed. It was dormant. Waiting. Digesting. In the silence that followed, I heard a sound. Not in my ears, in my thoughts. A whisper. You are not whole yet. I looked at Eliath. She heard it too. We never went back. But we never left, either.